Hey creeps, it's Cameron again, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about books, movies, writing, and all things spooky. On today's episode of Library Macabre, I will be reviewing The Nightmare Room by Chris Sorensen, which is the first book of the Messy Man series. Haunted house stories, no matter how predictable they often are, they never fail to show me a spooky good time on a dark and stormy night. Cliches and all, I always enjoy their gothic sensibilities and the way they reflect the divide between belief and skepticism, between life and death, and how those things tend to collide by the end of the story. But every once in a while, a book will come along that uses that same basic structure but builds on it and creates something fresh and new. That doesn't necessarily reinvent the genre, but it shows that when you have a story that deals with the mystery of death, it can have no limits. Chris Sorensen's The Nightmare Room, not to be confused with R.L. Stine's The Nightmare Room, it's a totally different thing, starts off pretty much the same way as most haunted house stories do. The story follows Peter Larson and his wife Hannah. They have just moved into an old farmhouse in Peter's hometown after his father falls ill. The couple is hoping that this will mark a new start for them after a very tragic event that they went through a year ago, but the evil forces inside the farmhouse have different plans. It sounds like a pretty standard ghost story, but what Chris Sorensen does here is add a personal flair. Aside from being an author, Chris Sorensen is also an audiobook narrator, and so is Peter, the novel's lead. In fact, Peter begins to use the basement of the farmhouse as a recording studio for his audiobooks, and that's where some of the most unnerving scenes in the book happen, is in this recording studio. It's a very unique twist that I've never read before in a book, and I think it'll show readers kind of a behind-the-scenes look of what goes into producing an audiobook. It's nowhere near as simple as just sitting down and reading a book. Grief is also a driving force behind The Nightmare Room. There's an echo of it throughout the story, which escalates into a very, very emotional climax. This is the grief that we all face when we lose a loved one, but it is also coupled with the grief of losing one's childhood. Essentially, The Nightmare Room is a great metaphor for childhood trauma and the monsters that tend to hang around long after. I really enjoyed this book. It made a big impact on me. It's definitely not the most fast-paced book. It's definitely a much slower burn. So if you're into that, I think you're really going to dig this. I also really enjoyed reading about Peter as a main character, as well as his wife Hannah. I feel like the two are a very nice couple. Even after all the tragedy that they've been through, they've still managed to hold their marriage together, which is very nice to see. And overall, it's just a solid little book, and I'm very excited to read the next one in the series. So there you go. That is my review of The Nightmare Room by Chris Sorensen, and a big thank you to Chris for sending me a review copy of this book. I really appreciate it. If you're interested in reading this book, of course, the link is going to be down below in the graveyard where you can purchase it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Later, creeps.